What is Kung Fu? Now this is actually a really heavy question, and it would be impossible to do it justice by answering it in just a few minutes. In the previous video, What is Karate?, we talked about establishing a collection of playlist series that would cover different categories of arts. Now we have a good start so far with playlists set up for Karate, Kempo, and the Korean arts. And we will be adding all sorts of different series as we go on, but one that we really wanted to delve into is a list for the Chinese martial arts. So today, this video is going to serve as a very brief introduction, and then we will continue to add videos that go into greater detail and highlight the different arts. But first, let's answer the question, just what is Kung Fu? I'm going to start this video right off the bat apologizing for any of my attempts of pronouncing Chinese words. I have zero experience speaking Chinese, so I'm going to do my very best, but I take full responsibility for any stern reprimands that I might receive in the comments. But speaking of words, let's start with the name. What is Kung Fu? The term Kung Fu has been very big in pop culture, from film to TV shows, and it's often the blanket statement term that's usually applied to Chinese martial arts. But in reality, that's not entirely accurate. The word Kung, or Gong, roughly translates to achievement or work. In the context of its usage in China, Kung Fu generally means the process of acquiring any skill through practice and hard work. It is not exclusive to the martial arts. For example, you could say that a good dancer has great Kung Fu. An artist paints a beautiful picture that they have great Kung Fu. Kung Fu is often understood to mean Chinese martial art, but in reality it's much, much more. Now you may also hear the terms Wushu and Kung Fu used interchangeably, but this would also be incorrect as there is a distinction. It is actually the term Wushu that translates to martial art, any martial art. If you wanted to specify Chinese martial arts, you say Zhuangwu Wushu. However, it is also important to understand that the word Wushu also refers to a very specific style of Chinese sport martial art developed around 1950 for the People's Republic of China. It is meant for exhibition and competition, and it's actually really impressive to watch. Now we can cover that in the future episode, but it's important to understand that Wushu can either mean martial art or refer to the specific sport depending on the context of its usage. Then there's also the word Xuanfa, which roughly translates to fist law or fist method. Now this word, when translated into Japanese, becomes Kenpo or Kempo, depending on which way you want to spell it. Now I broke down this translation of the word Kempo in my Origin of Kempo video, so please feel free to check that out for more elaboration on the word. The Chinese martial arts have had a very deep history, a wide range of influence, and include hundreds of different styles. To put in the context of just how far back it goes, old school karate is about less than 200 years old. With the Chinese martial arts, you can find some trace elements and roots that go back as far as 2,000 years. However, much of that is lost through time. China is a country with a very complicated history. It's full of wars, political changes, and loss of documentation. There are some direct lineages that are documented to go back at least, they're about up to 400 years old. For example, Tai Chi and the Shaolin martial arts. However, most of the traditional systems you see today don't typically go back that far, but usually go back maybe about 200 to 250 years. Now, as far as origin goes, there are different opinions and debates depending on which perspective you're looking at. The concept of fighting methods go way back to early human. I mean, we're competitive and combative by nature, so we've had methods of fighting since forever. As far as what has become Kung Fu today, many believe it began with the Shaolin Temple built in the Song Mountains in China's Henan province during the 5th century AD. Now, the style of combat developed at this temple, Shaolin Kung Fu, is often attributed with being one of the first institutionalized forms of martial arts in China. A Buddhist monk by the name of Buddhabhadra became the monastery's first abbot, and then later another Buddhist monk, Bodhidharma, arrived and is often credited with training the Shaolin monks in methods to strengthen mind and body, as well as bringing Chan Buddhism to China. Now, this is a very popular and romanticized version of history. Many like to attribute the Shaolin temples as the origin of Kung Fu. Now, while there are some styles that did originate and develop there, this is a big misconception. While the Shaolin Temple does have its historical significance, it is not realistically the origin of all Chinese martial arts. Most traditional styles of Kung Fu developed outside of the temples, in local villages, and as regional arts, and most likely through the military. The Chinese arts have also had a wide influence among other arts of the world. Even the roots of karate began during the Okinawan Ryukyu Kingdom and trade interactions with China. Local fighting systems in Okinawa merged with Chinese combat influences to create the basis of Te, and some of those ideas are still in karate that we know today. Now, if you take a look at some Chinese arts, particularly Five Ancestors or Kung Fu, you can see a lot of similarity in movements with that and traditional karate. Even with similar roots, Chinese martial arts differ from Japanese and Okinawan arts. And a lot of people ask, well, what is the difference between karate and Kung Fu? And the truth is, it's a bit of an unbalanced question to begin with. Karate refers to a specific type of art within similar origins and attributes, while Kung Fu involves hundreds of varieties, many of them extremely different from one another. Speaking in broad strokes, however, they often differ in movement. Japanese karate tends to have more linear motions, uniformity, and precise movements. This is a reflection of Japanese culture, which often has a much defined structure and hierarchy. The Chinese culture tends to be more lenient and adaptable, and this translates into the movements as well, and in their martial arts you will find movements that are more rounded out and fluid. A great example of this would be their use of the spear. In Japanese arts, the spear is often rigid, stiff, and strong, where in the Chinese arts they're usually flexible and they utilize the bounce and rebounding motions. This is particularly emphasized in competitions. You can even see differences in their use of swords. Japanese katanas have weight distributed towards the blade, are often wielded with two hands, and typically move in linear motions with stabs, slashes, and parries. The Chinese Dao, in contrast, has more weight with a curved blade, which lends the wielder to move the weapon in more circular patterns. Additionally, the majority of Japanese and Okinawan styles focus more on the waist for generating power, while the Chinese martial arts tend to put more emphasis on the hips. Now, these are generalities, of course. You're going to find hard, soft, circular, linear movements in both Chinese and Japanese arts. It's also worth noting that in many cases, in Japan, the martial arts were often the privilege of the elite and the upper class, while in China, martial arts were commonly practiced by farmers and civilians. In China, the three main avenues one could find an art were through a local village, sometimes temples, and very often through the military. Chinese martial arts like Baiji Chuan and Pi Gua Zhang came from villages. Wudang and Shaolin styles came from their respective temples. Shuai Jiao, which is Chinese wrestling, was commonly used to train soldiers, being the equivalent of samurai's jiu-jitsu. There are even martial arts like Wing Chun and Southern Praying Mantis Kung Fu, which at the times were taught and developed by rebel armies. With so many styles of Chinese arts, they are often categorized in a number of different ways. Now, styles are often grouped together in families or sects based on common themes. Now, these themes can be based on religion, movement, geography, competition, or how they utilize energy and qi. For example, many styles of Kung Fu are based on the movement observed by many animals, such as the crane, monkey, tiger, and snake, just to name a few. A very common distinction of Chinese martial arts is the classification of northern styles and southern styles. Now, some examples of northern style Kung Fu systems are Xingyi Xuan, Eagle Claw, and Northern Praying Mantis. Wing Chun, Choi Le Foot, and Fujian White Crane are some examples of the southern styles. Now, it is often said that the northern styles tend to be more fluid with a heavy focus on kicking, while the southern styles utilize shorter range combat and lower kicking techniques. Now, while you can find some systems that fit into this mold, this is not a fair or accurate description of the arts. The truth is, you're going to find a blend of techniques in both regions, and the Chinese arts are way too diverse and regionally influenced to be classified in such a broad way. But nevertheless, you will still hear them referred to as northern and southern styles. Balance and harmony are often an important part of the Chinese culture, and you can see this influence in their martial arts as well. Now, while each individual art can vary greatly from one to another, most of them are influenced by one or more of three primary schools of philosophy: Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, also known as the Three Teachings. Confucius was a scholar who lived in the time of the ancient Greek philosophers. Now, speaking very broadly here, Confucius taught that society would be better by adhering to three things: good moral deeds between people, proper hierarchy between people, and adherence to rituals between people. A few generations after he passed, his teachings became the state religion in China. For about 2 millennia, everyone in China, including the martial artists of course, studied Confucianism in some way. Therefore, the Chinese martial arts came to adapt Confucian ideas, such as teaching morality as part of the curriculum, catering to a strict hierarchy between members of the martial arts clan, and adhering meticulously to ceremonial engagements. The martial arts forms themselves, in that sense, are also ceremonies. Taoism is the most ancient of the Chinese philosophies and has existed already for many thousands of years. Unlike the teachings of Confucius, Taoism does not deal with society. Instead, Taoism tries to teach the principles which govern the universe and creation. Central to Taoism are the concepts of Taiji and Baohua. Taiji is the symbol containing the yin and yang. Baohua is breaking the yin and yang further into 8 symbols. The 8 symbols are called the 8 trigrams, or Baogua in Chinese. In the Chinese martial arts, the principles of Taiji and Baogua are found in countless styles, and they are used for a variety of things, from techniques to strategies, forms, and health cultivation methods. Because Taiji, Baogua, and the whole Taoism are also the basis of traditional Chinese medicine, then the Chinese martial arts inherently share the same core philosophy around which Chinese medicine was conceived. The internal martial arts of China, such as Xingyi Xuan, Bagua Zhang, and Taiji Chuan, all use Taoism and its terminology in their teachings quite abundantly. Buddhism follows the idea that pain is a part of life and suffering is going to happen, but one can transcend past that by finding enlightenment. There's an emphasis on meditation and purifying the mind, breaking away from material attachments and striving to reach nirvana, or a state of perfect happiness. Buddhism has therefore inspired many martial artists to utilize their practice as a means of movement, meditation, and seeking enlightenment and peace through the subjugation of one's violent nature. Most Chinese martial arts are influenced by at least one of these philosophies. Many of the arts will base their practice in two or all three, creating their own blended system of philosophical thought and interpretation. Like most traditional systems, Chinese martial arts are composed of basics, self-defense, and forms. Chinese forms are called Taolu, which translates to routine, sets, or set of roads. Standard to Chinese forms, stances are called steps, so when you move through a sequence of steps, you are performing part of the form. Now, when you're doing that, when you've moved from one point to another in which you're about to change direction, you have completed a road, and then you will continue in another road. Hence, what is created is a set of roads. A Taolu, with each road in itself based on a given number of steps. Each form will draw out a different set of roads. They can be formed individually, or there are forms designed for partners. Taolu is an integral part of training in the Chinese arts and are extremely popular for competition. If you've not seen them before, I highly encourage you to check out some Wushu Taolu competitions here on YouTube. They can be extremely impressive to watch. Just be aware, however, that Wushu Taolu are usually leaning towards aesthetic sport competition as opposed to the more traditional Taolu. Now, beyond the basics, you're going to find application and combat drills. This includes sparring, self-defense application, and drills known as pushing hands and sticky hands. Pushing hands as a general concept is a semi-compliant method of practice in which two students make hand contact and attempt to push, pull, divert, disrupt their opponent's balance, all without breaking contact. These drills are great for learning flow and how to anticipate and defend by feeling the movement of an opponent's body. Now, anyone who studies Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or any other grappling system can fully understand just how much you can read by feeling your opponent shift their weight and more, and how they move. The Chinese martial arts also have their own set of distinctive weapons, many of which demonstrate the dynamic movements of the arts. Now, there are four major types of Chinese weaponry. The first is the Chinese Dao, which is a single-edged sword with a blade that is moderately curved. It can be wielded with one hand, and these are great for slashing and chopping. We actually featured a unique version of this sword in the previous episode, the 9-Ring Dao, as part of our 5 Coolest Swords segment, so be sure to go check that out when you're done. The Jian is a double-edged sword with a straight blade. Now, this is an effective cut and thrust weapon. It can be one-handed or two for larger variations, and it has many different versions in the history, which is believed to go back as far as 2,500 years. Then we have the Gun, which is the Chinese staff weapon. This can be made of wood or steel. It's typically sized to be about the same height of the user, and sometimes it's thicker at one end and slightly thinned at the other. There are also 2 and 3 sectional variations of this weapon as well. Those get pretty interesting. And then we have the Qiang, the Chinese spear. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this weapon is characteristic of the flexible nature of the Chinese arts. At a length of 9 feet long, places this weapon on the shorter end of the scale, with variations increasing up to 14 and sometimes even up to 21 feet. With its flexible and whip-like ability, this weapon was often used for striking as well as stabbing. The spear tip is leaf-shaped and often sports a red tassel. Now, this tassel is usually made from horsehair and often helps stop the blood running from down the tip to the wielder's hands, and it was also a possible distraction for an opponent trying to keep an eye on the blade in battle. There are many other Chinese weapons such as the fu, or axe, gong, or Chinese bow, and the ever-deadly hook swords, which we also covered in our 5 Coolest Swords video. Now, unlike karate and the Japanese arts, the Chinese martial arts don't have a standardized uniform. Even historically speaking, the karate gi and Korean dobok are fairly new. In the Chinese arts, this uniformity doesn't exist. Each art determines their own code of dress, and each one is very different. Some wear civilian clothing, or sometimes a robe or wrestling jacket. Now, while there is no standard, many modern arts have adopted the tangzhuang, or a type of jacket that is straight collared, often made of silk, and features frog buttons. So now, this leads us into topics of belts and what kind of belt system the Chinese arts use. The broad answer to this question is the Chinese don't use a belt ranking system. That was developed by judo founder Jigoro Kano and is something found in the Japanese arts. In the Chinese martial arts, ranking does not work the same. The hierarchical structure isn't arranged by rank and levels as much as it is by familial relationship. Many styles treat their training and practitioners as family members of a unit. So you're not giving someone respect because of a rank they've achieved, but rather their position within the family. So a grandfather holds superiority over a father who holds superiority over a son. In many cases, an outsider who wishes to train in Kung Fu in a particular style will find a Shifu, which is a skilled teacher or master, and sometimes you'll hear it referred to as Sifu. You have no familial relation to this Shifu, and you're considered an outsider and a customer until the day you prove yourself worthy, and then you are initiated in a ceremony in which the Shifu takes you as an apprentice, or tudi. From this point on, the father-son hierarchy comes into play. The depth of material taught will vary greatly on the length of time and dynamics of the relationship. Now that being said, some modern-day styles of Kung Fu will use a ranking system, but you'll find this most notably in the West. These may be the same colored belts that karate uses, or sometimes they're sashes. Some schools will use colored shirts or other garb to be worn to denote rank. In any case, every style and every school will generally have their own way to rank students. Now sometimes there's a system of ethics that are taught in the Chinese arts called the martial morality. Why teach morality in the martial arts school? Well, there's many good reasons. This is something that the Chinese inherited from Confucius, who taught that morality and courteous behavior between people are an important means for correcting society. So martial morality, or wudu, is divided into two parts. The morality of deed, which pertains to the social relationships of others, and the morality of mind, which focuses on inner harmony between the wisdom and emotional mind. One example could be the etiquette used between teacher and student. It would be considered unethical to study under two Shifus in the same style. And if a student wishes to study or try an additional art, it would be proper to consult your current Shifu and obtain their permission. Now, as I said at the beginning, we could go deeper into each one of these topics as Chinese martial arts have an unbelievably detailed and rich history. The goal of this episode was to serve as a starting point of discussion and kick off what I hope will be a long-running series of videos as we develop them. Many of our viewers are Kung Fu practitioners, and I would absolutely love to read any elaboration you can offer or recommend any Chinese arts that we should be covering first. I would also like to extend my extreme gratitude to Shifu Jonathan Bluestein for his guidance and assistance on this topic. He is a scholar of the Chinese martial arts, and he contributed a lot of text to this episode. I would also like to heavily recommend his two books, as I find them incredibly insightful, and there's a lot of content to sink your teeth into. They are The Research of the Martial Arts and The Martial Arts Teacher. You can find both books listed in the description below. I am also pleased to announce that we are currently collaborating with Shifu Bluestein for an episode on the Chinese art of Xing Yi Xuan. Now, we will keep you up to date, and be sure to subscribe and click on the bell icon so that you can be notified and catch any updates when this episode starts to come out. Thank you all for watching, and I want to close out on a quote that I came across while I was researching this topic. There's an old saying that states, "One must first learn civility before he can learn the art, and one must first learn his ethics before he knows his skills." I really like that, and I hope you do too.